Good morning, everybody. I'm Rick, and this is Two Brothers Outdoors. And if this is the first time you're joining us on this video on our channel, we appreciate you watching, and we hope you hit that subscribe button. All right, guys, I've already done this scene one time. I explained what I was doing, explained about the blade, the tension. My mill's making a knocking noise over here when I started up. I'm checking the bearings and the bearing mounts and the wedges, the wedge cones and these sheaves or pulleys as some people call them. And believe it or not, I forgot to turn my microphone on. And when the microphone's not on and the receptacle for the microphone is in the camera, we get no sound. So I'm doing this all over and it's already taken apart. So I'll get you up to speed real quick. Mill's making a knocking noise over here when I first started up. So I've pulled the shrouds off, pulled the blade off, pulled the drive belt off. I pulled the shrouds off first and ran it. Didn't hear the noise. So it's a possibility these shrouds have got a crack in them somewheres, or it's harmonics. The harmonics of the shroud is banging on the mill. But we'll address that if that's the case. But right now, I'm going to check these bearings. And I'm going to check the bearing mounts and make sure they're tight. Now, our last video, we discussed the tension on the blade. Hud-son suggests all around 35 foot-pounds of torque on this tension bolt. And that's what we've been doing. Haven't seemed to run into any real problems other than we're getting stress cracks in the blades, and which is also, I guess, normal. But the blade breaks eventually. So, but that's after several sharpenings. But anyway, I built the tension gauge. We put it on this mill. We put it on Tim's mill. 35 PSI is too much according to the tension recommended by the manufacturer of the blades, which is Wood-Mizer. So we have dropped our torque wrench poundage down to 20 pounds, 20 foot-pounds. All right. So what we've done is we've gone from 35 foot-pounds on the torque wrench to 20 foot-pounds on the torque wrench, and that puts the blade right at 25,000 PSI. And that's about the upper end of what Wood-Mizer recommends. They recommend between 20, 25,000. But I'm thinking if we have the tension on the blade correct to the manufacturer of the blade specifications, that these blades might last a little longer and it might be a little easier on the equipment. So with that being said, we're going to check the bearings right now. We're going to check the bearing mounts, make sure they're tight. And also at this point, while I'm doing this, I would like to mention that we have some people complaining about the sound quality of our videos. Well, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, we've invested in microphones, which I have on right now. But over the course of our channel creation and all the things that we've done, we don't want to invest a bunch of money into electronics for videos. And here's why. Our microphones and our tripods and our cameras go everywhere with us. If we're fishing, if we're ice fishing, if we're hunting, if we're logging, if we're sawmilling, this equipment goes with us. We have lost, I can't even keep track of how many tripods we've lost. Just things falling on them, you back over them, or they just riding on the four-wheeler and you clip a tree, breaks a leg off. So the tripod that I'm using now is actually a surveyor's tripod made out of aluminum. And I've already made a repair on that one. It's got 3 braces on it, and the braces are made out of aluminum, and one of them snapped off when I hit a tree. So I made one out of wood. And my tripod looks like something you'd find in a junkyard. But it works, and as long as it works, we're going to stick with it. We had a company recently offer us tripod to try out, and I looked at it and I just flat told them that tripod's not going to hold up. We've broke many tripods that look like that. All right, so right now what I'm doing is checking the wedge cones in these pulleys, and they're a little bit, the bolts on them are just a little bit loose, but not bad. I'm just making sure there's nothing wrong here. This one bearing that's right here in the back, you can't see that bearing with the shrouds on. Now I've got a I've definitely got a bearing squeaking. That is an indication of the bearing going bad. So what I'm going to have to do is figure out what bearing it is. Aha! I think it's this front bearing right here. I do have an extra bearing. Yeah, when I turn this slow, maybe you can hear it. I don't know. But when you turn this really slow, you can hear a creaking sound. And that creaking sound is definitely a bearing. I'm going to say it's this front bearing. Only one way to find out, and that's to pull it off and see what we have. Tell you what, I got my tools home with me from when I worked at the international truck dealership. I got those tools home, and I have a power ear. I'm going to go grab that real quick and bring it down here and put it to use and see if I can make sure it's that one bearing. I don't want to change a bearing and then still have the same problem. All right, guys, the nice thing about being retired is over the years I've collected hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tools to do my job, and now I have those tools at home. Okay, it's definitely this front bearing. That right there makes it nice because I can narrow it right down to the proper bearing. All right, so I do have extra bearings, and this is still under warranty, so I'll give Hud-son a shout and see if they can get a bearing for me. Meanwhile, we're going to drop this bearing and take it off and replace it. And at some point in my life, I bought 2 sets of Allen wrenches, one metric and one standard. evidently to work on the mill. And I forgot I had them. Oh boy. That's tight. They are not showing signs or any interest of coming loose. All right, guys, this is one of those times. I'm going to go get another tool from my toolbox to get these loose. I'll be back. All right, guys, I brought a bucket, put my tools in it because sawdust is notorious for claiming nuts and bolts and small tools. You drop it, sinks in the sawdust. You can rake that sawdust for an hour and not find a bolt. I've actually learned to go get a magnet and bring that magnet out here to do that with. All right, so I got some snap-on tools here. And if I snap a snap-on tool, they're under warranty. So therefore, they'll replace it. Got to find the socket that fits it the best. I actually think that's a metric. It seems to me 4mm seems to fit it better than the 3/16. They're close. All right. Oh, that's not good. I'm actually bending the socket here. Might have to heat this up with a torch to get them come loose. Well, I'll be darned. That's not good at all. I don't know what to think about that. I got one more idea. We're going to get an impact wrench. See what happens with that. Okay, guys, here's where we're at. I heated the edge of the bearing up where the set screws are with a propane torch, which I think everybody knows is just about useless in cold weather. I did heat the model up a little bit in front of the salamander to get it to work. I got one set screw out. When that set screw came out, it fell in the sawdust. Oh, big surprise. And now I can't find it. Hopefully the new bearings have set screws in them. The second set screw, I heated it up. I broke off my snap-on socket Allen wrench. I have another one that's made by Mac. I stuck that in there. I stripped out the Allen screw. So I took a Torx bit. I took a Torx bit, drove it in there, and heated it up again. I drove the Torx bit in there, took it out, heated it up again, pounded the Torx bit back in it, put a 1/4-inch drive ratchet on it, and I broke the Torx bit, and now the Torx bit is broke off inside the Allen screw, which makes it impossible to drill because the Torx bit is very, very, very hard metal. So now I've got two options. I can go get the acetylene torch and burn this SOB off of here, or I can go get my cutting grinder and try to cut just far enough back to get that piece of crap set screw out. I think I'm going to go with the grinder first. If that don't work, I will get the acetylene torch down here. I will get that bearing off. 100% promise you. All right, so I'm going to go get my grinder. And for the 15th time, I'll be back. Okay, guys. I finally got the bearing off. I can turn it and find the rough spot in it, so it's definitely bad. Now, I want to show you guys something real quick. There is a grease fitting on this bearing, if you look right here. But this bearing is like a trunnion bearing. It's got a curved outside to it so that it can move back and forth inside this pillar block. But if you look, that grease fitting right here only puts grease around the outside edge right here. It doesn't do anything at all for the bearing inside because there's no place for the grease to go. Now, it's an indentation in the sleeve right here. I don't know what it's for. Looks like there's a pin or something right there, but it's definitely not for greasing this bearing. These bearings are sealed, and because they're sealed, greasing the outside right here, it just makes it so it moves inside this pillar block like this. It doesn't do anything for the bearing at all, unfortunately. But that's nobody's fault. That's the way they make these bearings. I've dealt with these on boats. I've dealt with these on heavy equipment. And they're all the same. There's no way to grease this bearing. It's a sealed bearing. You can pop this seal off of here like this and grease it. Well, I say that. There's another seal inside here. So at any rate, these bearings are not greasable. They're a sealed bearing. And once they start going dry, not a thing you can do for them. All right, I'm going to go get the new bearing, clean the shaft up. The new bearing does have set screws in it. Thank you. So I'll clean the shaft up, put a little grease on the shaft so that the next time I have to change the bearing, it'll come off, and I'll put a little dab of grease on the set screws as well so that they don't rust up in the bearing sleeve and become hard to get out. All right. I'm going to try to keep my tools in this bucket so they don't fall in the sawdust. Let me go get the other bearing, get things cleaned up, and then we'll get it all together. All right, guys. I got the new bearing in place. Put a little grease on the shaft. I cleaned the shaft up with a piece of emery cloth. Put a little grease on the shaft, a little grease on the inside of the where the bearing goes on the shaft. That'll make it easier in the future if I have to take it off again. And those little set screws, they gave me, and those little set screws that gave me such a hard time, I took those out, put a little grease on them as well. And that'll keep them from rusting up in those threads and causing a problem. Now, guys, I've been doing mechanic work and fabrication work for a very long time. And when you take something apart and put it back together, it doesn't take a whole lot of sense or time to put a little grease on the nuts, the bolts, the shafts, whatever you're messing with, whatever has to come apart maybe again somewheres in the future. Little anti-seize, little grease. Oil won't stick with it, but grease will. So will anti-seize. And it makes it so much easier to come apart for either the next guy or yourself. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I'm putting the blade on, and I'm going to tension the blade. These two bolts on this bearing are loose because this bearing adjusts, but Hud-son had the foresight to put a stop, adjustable stops in front of the bearings. So these bearings being the same, I should be able to tension this blade. It'll pull it up against that stop, and then I will torque those bolts down on the bearing. I'm going to just tighten this up pretty tight to pull it against that. All right. Seems like I got half my toolbox out here. Okay, so what that did was that pulled this bearing. Whoops. Got some grease on my hand. Oh, roll this back a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to tighten these bolts up real quick. Now that the bearing has been pulled against the stop, and then we'll check the blade tracking. Make sure it's tracking properly. And if it is, we're going to put the shrouds back on, the drive belt back on, and we are going to be in business. Okay, that looks excellent. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the blade a couple revolutions with it tight. And if that blade is tracking correctly, it should be right on the back side of the pulley. It's good on this side. Oh, it's fantastic on this side. We are good to go. All right. I'm going to take the wrenches I need to put the shrouds back on. Leave them here. I'm going to put my other wrenches back here on the wall. Get them out of the way so I don't lose them. Okay. I'm going to take all my tools that go in the house, put them back in here, move this out of the way. Take my grease and my penetrating oil. My torch has got to go back in the basement. Just kind of get things picked up a little bit before we get overwhelmed and lose something in that stupid sawdust, which is not beyond the realm of possibility. All right. So I'm going to take this bad bearing right here and put it back in here. And I'm going to try to get that warrantied. Shouldn't be a problem. All right, I'm going to fire it up and run it for a minute. I can tell you right now, that sounds 100% better. Actually sounds like it did when it was brand new. Except it's got a lot bigger engine on it. All right, let's get the shrouds on and we'll run it a little bit and see if it still clangs and bangs and makes a bunch of noise. If it doesn't, I think we had a successful day. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I have shooting it. Sarcasm intended. What should have been a simple job turned into a couple of hours job if it wasn't for having a grinder with a cutting wheel on it and able to get access at the bearing. That would have been some kind of pain in the neck. I would have had to use an acetylene torch to get it off. All right, but it's off. Shaft is cleaned up. New bearing is on it. Everything's greased. And like I said, set screws got grease on them, and the shaft has now got a coat of grease on it and inside the bearing. So that next time I have to take this apart, it should come right off. So next time I take this apart, set screws should come out easily and the bearing should slide right off. All right, guys, thanks for coming along with us. Until the next one, we will catch you later.